Mark Carney had a busy Friday balancing his job as Prime Minister while trying to convince Canadians to vote Liberal. This morning in Montreal, Carney spoke to President Donald Trump by phone for the first time, then held a virtual meeting with premiers to get them up to speed before updating media from the Port of Montreal.
Over the coming weeks, months, and years, we must fundamentally reimagine our economy. We must ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world.
Carney says he would invest $5 billion to diversify trade and become less reliant on the United States. He also says his conversation with President Donald Trump today was constructive and productive, but that doesn't mean an end to tariffs. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling with the Liberal leader. Ashley.
David, Liberal leader Mark Carney just described his call with Donald Trump, saying it was constructive, cordial, and substantive, and said that they agreed to negotiate a new economic and security relationship right after the election. Carney is campaigning for a majority government, saying he wants to lead those discussions, but he also said that on that call, he didn't get any indication from Trump that he would back down on his tariffs on the auto sector, steel, or aluminum, and said that Canada will retaliate after Trump announces his next move in this trade war on April 2nd. Now, Carney had said that he wouldn't talk to Trump unless he respects Canada's sovereignty. When I asked him about that today, he said that Trump did do that. He did respect Canada's sovereignty in both his public and his private comments. And we really saw a change in tone from Trump today. He described the conversation himself as very good. Trump also didn't call Carney the governor. He didn't mention his repeated threat about Canada becoming the 51st state. I asked Carney if he trusts that, and he said that there's always a strategy and a negotiation when he answered that question. Now, on the campaign trail, he also announced a $5 billion fund that he's proposing to help diversify trade and to work with ports like the one I'm at right now to help them compete, to help them cooperate with one another rather than compete. Carney is now on his way back to Ottawa. David?
All right, thank you, Ashley. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke in Montreal. Well, the other party leaders were asked today about this positive call between Liberal leader Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump. Have a listen.
Well, let's hope that there is a change in tone. We want to put an end to this crazy tariff chaos. We have the best trading relationship in the history of the world. Why not continue and grow that trading relationship as two separate sovereign nations?
There are many things I'm going to attack Mark Carney on when it comes to domestic policy, but when it comes to our fight against Donald Trump, we all need to be united in fighting back against Donald Trump and protecting our country and protecting jobs.
What I read in Mr. Carney's declaration is a problem. He committed Canada to something that would happen only after the election, pretending in a gross manner that he would still be the Prime Minister.
Okay, let's begin there with our Friday Party Insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Good to see you all, gang. It's the end of the first week. Greg, this feels like a significant day today. Mark Carney speaking to Donald Trump, setting up a negotiation for when this election is over, and being called Prime Minister and Mark by the President. What do you make of this?
Market change in tone, and I think, I'm trying to decide whether the relief I feel is as a Canadian or as a partisan Liberal, but who cares? Don't swear. There was an amount of respect there from the President, which, you take with a grain of salt, and you wonder, how long, why do we accept this? But as we've sat here for a lot of Fridays through breaking news the last couple of months, I'll take it. Perhaps the President is not immune to reading polls as well. And maybe this is about ensuring that whatever happens after the election, we know that we've got Danielle Smith and others working really hard with people that are very close to Trump, but perhaps the president is seeing, well, just in case, we've got a long ways to go before the election's over, but just in case, I better, try to preserve this relationship or try to appear that I'm trying to preserve this relationship before we get too far.
I just want, if I can, to the control room, let's just play this longer Trump clip from earlier today, because it's been a while since the president spoke, and it's important to hear the whole context. So here's Donald Trump speaking earlier.
Mark called me today at 10 o'clock. We put out a statement. We had a very, very good talk. He's going through an election now, and we'll see what happens. But we have Liberation Day, as you know, on April 2nd, and I'm not referring to Canada, but many countries have taken advantage of us, the likes of which nobody even thought was possible for many, many decades, And, that has to stop. We're going to end up with a very good relationship with Canada and a lot of the other countries. But we had a very good talk, the Prime Minister and myself, and I think things are going to work out very well between Canada and the United States.
Now, look, Fred, it's possible that could have changed while we were playing the clip, right? But that's what we have at the moment. And, I'm not referring to Canada. I'm talking about people ripping us off, calling the Prime Minister, Mark, very good talk. I mean, what do you make of it all?
It's weird. I don't know what that is. It's
Fair.
like an actual normal adult wrote his statement and the tweet that he put out after the call with Carney. It was weird. I don't understand. I'd like to know what that conversation was like. Mm-hmm. How did he get there? Why did he get there? What is he trying to do with this? I don't know.
Mel, what are your thoughts? I mean, he intruded into this election pretty aggressively with the auto tariffs, and there's been movement ever since leading to today. Where do you think things stand at this moment?
Yeah, it's kind of wild that we're talking about this super reasonable, rational comment as breaking news, because it has been so over the place with the president. And I think I said earlier that I feel like I have whiplash because I just never know what he's going to say next. I think it's a good thing. I think folks who are paying attention to the election, who are tuning in at home, it's a little bit relieving that he's not continuing to call us the 51st state. Does that last? Hard to say. I agree. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall to listen to that conversation, to hear what was said, for this change in tone, if it had to do with the call or if it had to do with other circumstances. To your point, the polls look really different, so maybe you have to take a different approach. Hopefully it lasts, and then we can pick this up at the end of the election. Of course, if that happens, this election takes a bit of a turn and becomes maybe a bit of a different ballot box question. But yeah, fascinating turn in events with President Trump today.
It's remarkable. I was texting Liberals today to say, how do you think it went with the president, with the call? And they said it's positive, but who knows, right? And I think that's the thing. But, Fred, in terms of sort of cementing the ballot question of it being about Trump, it seems like a good 2 to 3 days for Mark Carney. I mean, how do you view it in terms of, from the chair of a former campaign director?
Right. Well, right now, it is the ballot question, and Carney is the only one actually talking about it. Poilievre, his messaging has been, he's done other different announcements over the last week, including today he did one on crime, I believe it was, and yesterday was on tax-free saving account. Not ballot question announcements. And the clip we just saw of Poilievre, he was answering a question from the media on it. He wasn't talking about it proactively. This is the ballot question. This is the story we're talking about that Canadians are seized by, and he's not on the field. And Jagmeet Singh also basically saying he's got some domestic policies. He also just completely ceded to Carney, saying, yeah, we'll be united on what Carney wants to do internationally. That to me was a real, there's a battlefield right now. It's Trump. That's the ballot question. That's the field that this campaign is being fought on. Carney's the only one on it right now, and that's a big problem for the other political parties.
So Greg, Fred always, you might have heard him once or twice talk about narrative on this panel. If this is a Trump ballot question, Carney, Wednesday night, I noticed when he went to his rally in Kitchener, one of the most trade vulnerable cities in Canada, and also an area where the Conservatives are looking to gain, I think it's safe to say, right? He mentioned a majority government in that speech for the first time. And then you see him dealing with Trump over the course of the week. This argument today, I spoke to the president. He respected sovereignty. We're going to meet. Trump saying things like, I'm not crapping on Canada today. So is this the beginning of the narrative for not just a win, but a majority here? Because the polling would suggest it's in play. And if he can knock it down with more proof points, where does it go?
Yeah, and no one, it's a big mistake to start, measuring the drapes before you've actually won the office. But in my memory, I kind of have two different points of view about asking for a majority or assuming one. One was near the end of the 2004 election. MP Randy White, the Conservatives were doing quite well. Stephen Harper started talking about winning, and then Randy White talked about the Supreme Court, to hell with the Supreme Court on things like same-sex marriage. And I remember dealing with a reporter at the time, and listen, folks, don't write me, I know what lemmings do, but I said, don't get in the way of a lemming that's going to jump off a cliff. And then I remember 5 years previous, John Hammond, Nova Scotia, working with Bernard Lord was the premier in New Brunswick, and it might have been Pat Binns and PEI. I apologize if I get that wrong, but he met with the other two premiers, and he asked Nova Scotians for a majority, and in order to work, collaborative, and it worked in that case. So it is something that you have to be very, very careful with. I would prefer Canadians to be telling the Liberals that they want majority, if that's the way, and I'm also very cognizant that we have had, more minority parliaments than majority since 2000, and maybe that's the representation. But this is a very, very different time. I did find this week, I think the Liberals had an excellent week, but there were times where I looked at all the campaigns and I thought, are you really reflecting what I'm hearing when I get out of Ottawa about what people are actually thinking about? And there were times that I wondered that there's things that you have to do, there's regional reasons why you say things. I have to say, I look at the Conservative campaign, it reminds me of like an HBO show where at the bottom it would say 6 months previous. Because what they're talking about would have been really good in a September-October election. But right now, it's just kind of a head scratcher.
Well, look, we're going to do a deep dive. We've got time, right? I can tell you that. I do want to talk pretty heavily about the Conservatives in just a little bit on the show, because there's some things happening there that, Fred, I want you to decode for me. But Mel, I wonder, like the Trump factor, just to keep it on this, and what it has done to the election here. This was an election that was going to be mostly about Trump. It's now almost totally about Trump, and with the auto tariffs, and now today. I mean, what does this do going into April 2nd next week, and then setting the stage for the days after that?
It's kind of hard to say, or kind of hard to see how it changes from what it's looking like right now, based off of, like Fred mentioned, what the other political parties are doing, but also based on what the Liberals are doing. I agree. I think the Liberals had a good week. I don't know that if the opposition parties were giving them a bigger run for it, it would have maybe looked a little bit different. There were some mistakes that you can't make, and I think if we were in a different circumstance, it would be a little bit different. In the context of Trump, I agree with you that it's obviously hard for the opposition parties to weigh into that conversation. But I do think that there's room in the conversation. I think of, what Jagmeet was saying about the tariffs on auto and what his plan was for auto workers and meeting with auto workers. I think the way that polls look, there is a big responsibility for folks that are going to be keeping, not the balance of power, but folks who are going to be making sure that Liberals do what they should be doing if they do end up being government. And I think that, I don't think that that's the pitch that Jagmeet is making, but I think that that is a pitch that Jagmeet would do well eventually. So I think that those are also things to pay attention to, which may be why, you're not really hearing them go against Mark Carney too much. And I think that that's also a good thing. I don't think people at home watching want us to be having those big fights about how we treat Trump or how we go up against Trump, because folks are rightly scared. So I think there is some appetite for a little bit of, collaboration there.
Okay, can we actually just show the polling top line numbers right now, just the latest on our poll tracker? We update this. I think Eric does the big update on Monday, but his polls come in again and again and again. Just look at where we are. This is an aggregate of polls. The older the poll, the less weighting it gets in these numbers. But you can see right there, this looks like a Liberal majority government at 41%, but the Conservatives at 37.5%. If they were to lose, they would lose with the largest vote share of any loser in a national election since I think pre-World War II, maybe around World War I, going back to the 1920s. So it's really, and Mel, I'm not taking a shot here, a lot of New Democrat voters have gone to them, a lot of Bloc voters have gone to them in Quebec, and Fred, the galvanizing effect is this Trump factor, and the confidence in Carney to deal with it, seemingly the 1-2 punch of those things, and that seems to be the early trend and the coalescing of things, though how solid it is, we don't know at this stage of the election.
That's what's interesting. We're, the polls show, the aggregator here, we're 3 points back. That's not that far back with 4 weeks to go.
Totally.
Lots can happen.
Yep.
And the crowds that Poilievre is bringing out are massive. I've never seen crowds that big in all of my time campaigning. I couldn't imagine the work it goes into bringing crowds out that big.
But with 38%, you're going to be able to get crowds like that in big population areas, right? Like, how should we view those two things?
Well, I think it's more of he's getting the crowds because there is enthusiastic support for him. There is
Yes,
very strong.
absolutely.
Harper was the last time when he got his majority government in 2011. He got 39% of the vote. He won government 2 other times, not that high. So there is enthusiasm here for Poilievre and the Conservatives. His message resonates with a lot of Canadians, and that's what's going to. We're looking at these polls. It's a 3-point spread. Who goes and shows up at the ballot box, and
and how efficient is it?
How efficient? That's true. We have the western provinces are obviously weighted with Conservative support, but also these Canadians who are supporting Poilievre, a lot of them have never been that engaged in politics before, haven't voted before. Are we going to be able to get them out? Based on the crowds and based on the money raised, I think we will. And it's whether, will the Liberal support drop? Will they be as enthused? I do think Trump is the question, and Poilievre needs to be talking about him.
Right, yeah. It's like it's a air war versus ground war sort of thing, because the Conservatives seem to be counting quite heavily on the organization they have, bringing out the crowds and deliver that in the vote, whereas the Liberals are playing to the national mood, right? And we'll see what the organization.